Ladies, gentlemen, and deities of all ages, welcome back to another video. So we finished the full playable units guide and now it's time for the classes. There are 40 different classes in this game. So we've got a pretty long video ahead of us. No fancy intro, I'm just going to ask you to leave a like, share, and subscribe if you like my content, and comment down below if you like what I do or want to share some of your points on what I'm going to say. The way this video is going to be structured is as follows. I'm going to do every single tier 2 class first, and I'm going to have a nice black spoiler bar over the tier 3s for those of you who don't want to know about them. And then after that, in the same order I did the tier 2s, I'm going to do the tier 3s right below them. So, tier 2s first, tier 3s in the second half of the videos if you guys don't want spoilers, and I'll give you a little warning before we jump right into that. I'm going to talk a little bit about every class. I'm going to talk about its class skill that you get, as well as the 2 abilities that you get along with it. There's really not much detail to that. Well, I guess there's also some growths for every class. So we'll go over those in the same way that we did in the recruitment video. They'll be on the left side of your screen, right where that black bar is. That is spoiler tagging all of the nice recruitable units if you didn't want to see those. So let's just jump right into it. Our first class is the Gallant class, and it has 40% HP growth, 30% might, 10% speed, 20% dex, 25% defense, 5% fortitude, 15% mastery, and 5% luck. This class comes with the Honor-Clad skill, which is damage plus 5 against enemies above 50% HP. This is a fantastic skill. It's very consistent, it's going to dish out that damage, and with a tank unit kind of like this, you're going to want that consistency. The first ability it has is Call to Arms. It costs 60 mana, and what it does is it drops a banner on an adjacent tile, and it increases the power by X amount, scaling according to mastery, for allies within 2 tiles. The other ability that it has is Overpower. This costs 40 mana, and it shoves a unit up to 2 tiles away, applying 11 stacks of light vulnerable if a target is an enemy. Now to talk briefly about the upgrades that these abilities have. Call to Arms can upgrade the duration by 1 twice, so you can increase the number of turns that banner will last. It can also reduce the mana cost of it from 60 to 45, or it can increase the power mastery scaling by 35%, which is this value that you see here, the power. The Overpower skill, shove a unit up to 2 tiles away applying 12 stacks of light vulnerable if a target is an enemy, can upgrade mana cost by 10, apply light poison stacks equal to 1, increase the stack's mastery scaling by 30%, so specifically these light vulnerable stacks, or heal the user for 5 HP when you cast it. The next class we're talking about is the Seeker class, and this is a 2-range physical bow class. It has 25% HP growth, 25% might growth, 5% speed, 30% dex, 20% defense, 10% fortitude, 30% mastery, and 10% luck. The class skill is Exposing Light. Attacks apply 4 heavy vulnerable stacks, and it increases an ally's accuracy by 44 for 2 turns. The abilities that you can have with the Seeker class are Illuminate, which increases allies' accuracy by 34 for 2 turns, and the upgrades that it can be had is that it allows the ability to be self-casted. It extends the range that the ability can target by 1, so you can target some of your allies further away, increases the duration that the ability lasts, or increases the mana cost and the accuracy by 50%. This honestly could be kind of good, but I've never had any issues hitting. Enchant Weapon is the second skill. Enchant your weapon, making your next 3 attacks deal 6 additional damage. This is actually a pretty good one, and I think it'll be more useful if you go into a physical class after this, because you'll do more damage in that physical class, and the ranged ones usually don't have much of an enemy phase. The first upgrade reduces the mana cost of the ability by 10. The second one, mana cost and attacks raised by 100%, which could be actually pretty good. Increases the duration of the ability by 1, and ability also clears debuffs from the target. The next class is the Nightblade class, and its growths are 5% HP, 10% might, 35% speed, 20% dex, 0% defense, 25% fortitude, 25% mastery, 15% luck. The class skill is Shadow Step. Dodge increased by 20 for 2 turns after using an ability. This is pretty good. It lets you dodge tank. The abilities are Grimstroke, which applies 3 heavy poison stacks to an enemy, and what poison does is it reduces stats by the number of stacks that the enemy has. Heavy means it lasts for 3 turns. The first upgrade increases the range that the ability can target by 1. The second one reduces the mana cost of the ability by 10. The third, mana cost and stacks raised by 100%. And the last one increases the stack's mastery scaling by 15%, so you just get more poison stacks. This is pretty good. The second skill, Fleet Feet, gives an ally 3 speed for 1 turn. The amount of speed that you give also scales by mastery. And the upgrades are mana cost and speed raised by 100%, increasing the range that the ability can target by 1, increasing the duration of the ability by 1, and allowing the ability to be self-casted. This is actually really good. The last class in this chain is the Devoted class. Its growths are 25% HP, 15% might, 20% speed, 25% dex, 5% to defense and fortitude, 30% mastery, and 30% luck. The personal skill of this class is the Executioner skill, and it grants crit plus 8 per status effect on target up to 32. So you can stack up to 4 different status effects on the target to get a lot of crit on them. The only downside is that you have to debuff first and then attack to get that critical bonus, and you won't always be able to create so many debuffs. The first ability is Spinning Blade, which gives 14 stacks of light block to yourself. The first upgrade reduces the mana cost of the ability by 10. The second one increases the number of stacks by 5. The third one clears debuffs from the target or targets. And the last upgrade increases the stack's mastery scaling by 40%. So you can really get a lot of block to this and help tank. The second skill, Hemorrhage, applies heavy bleed to an enemy. So the bleed will last 3 turns. Here it says 2 combats. And they take damage equal to the number of stacks after the combat. The first upgrade is reducing the mana cost by 10. The second one increases the mana cost and the number of stacks by 50%. The third one increases the range that the ability can target by 1. And the fourth one increases stacks mastery scaling by 35%. So it's another one that increases the number of stacks. The second class tree that we're going to talk about is the Mage class tree. And we are going to go ahead and get started with the Scholar class. The growths here are 25% HP, 25% might, 30% speed, 10% dex, 5% defense and fortitude, 25% mastery, and 10% luck. This comes with the skill Building Knowledge. Mana use raises fortitude stat by 2 for the rest of the chapter. This isn't that great, but it could be nice if you want to use this class as a mage tank class. The abilities that come with it are Phase. This is the largest draw to this class. It's basically warp, and it allows you to teleport an ally to a tile up to 5 tiles away. This distance will scale based on your mastery. The upgrades are reduces the mana cost of the ability by 10, which is a no-brainer. You should definitely get this one. Clearing debuff from the targets. This is a nice one, but not necessary. Allowing the ability to be self-casted. This could be interesting if you're going for some sort of warp tank build. And the last one increases the range that the ability can target by 1, so you can target or allies up to 2 tiles away from you. You can also do even more than that with some ring combos. There are some rings that allow you to extend the range that ranged abilities can target. So this in combo with that ring would be really interesting. The second skill is the Ancient Writ skill. Read from your tome, granting an ally 38 mana. The problem with this one is unless you get this reduction here, reducing the mana cost by 10, and then also pairing it with mana mastery skill by 30%, you're really not going to get more bang for your buck with casting this. Also, most of the time you're going to be phasing away or using some of the other skills, so you might not really want to use this much. Phase is really strong, and using this multiple times is pretty good utility. The next class that we can talk about is the Aegis class. Aegis is a one-range physical sword class that seems to be kind of the mage tank class of sorts, but it is physical. I would have liked to see it be more of a magical-based class. And the growths are as follows: 30% HP, 10% in might, speed, and dex, 35% in defense and fortitude, and 10% in mastery and luck. The class skill is Reflection. Taking damage increases damage of next attack by 20%. This is really nice, but the only downside is that the might growth is so low, and people who go into this class usually have lower might growths here, that even if it's increasing it by 10%, how many points is that going to be? 2? Maybe 3 if you're hitting for 30 damage? It's really not that much, but it is a little bit nice. The abilities are Relic Refraction, which applies a set number of heavy blind stacks to an enemy within 2 tiles. Blind just decreases hit rate, and the number of stacks are the number that it decreases the hit rate by. The upgrades are increases the number of stacks applied by 10, flat, increases the range that the ability can target by 1, casting the ability heals the user for 6, and the last one reduces the mana cost by 10. The second skill is really what the standout is for this class, and that is Repulsor Shield. Surround an ally with energy for 3 turns, reflecting 12 damage every time they are hit in combat. You can either use this on yourself if you're in this class and you want to go tank, or what you can do is use it on your tank ally. So say you're building a Dreadnought or a Tamer or one of those other tank classes, you can give them this shield and it'll last for a long time and they'll just keep reflecting damage back and forth. The upgrades are reducing the mana cost by 10, increasing the duration of the ability by 1, which it's already 4 turns, so increasing 3 turns, so increasing it to 4 is pretty strong. The target of the ability is also granted mana 10, which is really nice, and you can clear debuffs. So this is a fantastic skill, honestly, one of the better skills in the game. In my current demonic playthrough, I'm actually going to try and use this as a combination with my tank units. The next class that we're going to talk about is the Warlock class. It has 20% HP growth, 25% might, 10% speed, 25% dex, 10% defense, 30% fortitude, 10% mastery, and 5% luck. Just in case I didn't mention this already, all of these are additive onto whatever the base growths of the unit are. If they have 40% HP base and they change into the Warlock class, they now have 60%. The Warlock class comes with a skill called Black Flame. Attacking a poisoned enemy heals unit for damage done. And would you look at that, conveniently, the abilities are Hellfire and Poison Nova. Let's start with Poison Nova since we're talking about poison already. You explode with necrotic energy, applying 7 light poison stacks spread to enemies within 2 tiles. So everyone around you will get poisoned for this number of stacks. And then if you attack them, you heal. The first upgrade, it increases the number of stacks applied by 3, which is nice. The second one increases the size of the AoE by 1, so now it's everyone within 3 tiles. The third upgrade reduces the mana cost of the ability by 10, which is also nice. And the fourth one increases stacks mastery scaling by 25%. Based on what your mastery is, this one versus this one will be one better than the other. So it might be better to increase the scaling by 25% over the 3 flat stacks. But the AoE is really nice, and so is the mana cost reduction, so it's going to have to be a toss-up between these 3. The second skill is Hellfire. Deal 30 damage to an enemy within 3 tiles. And this is just your basic flat damage. The first upgrade heals you for 50% of the damage done. The second upgrade increases the range that you can target by 1. The third upgrade decreases the mana cost and the damage by 50%, which I've honestly never really seen any good utility for. Usually I just avoid these. And the first one increases damage scaling. Honestly, if it were up to me, I would probably go with the healing as well as the range. I feel like it would probably be easier to use and a little bit more consistent than the Poison Nova and then personal skill combo. The last class in this tree that we are going to talk about is the Geomancer class. It has 40% HP growth, 20% might, 5% speed, 10% dex, 20% defense, 10% fortitude, 30% mastery, and 20% luck. The class-specific skill is Astral Blessing. Spending mana applies 4 light block to 2 allies within 2 tiles. Initially, this doesn't seem that great, but honestly, in the early game on demonic mode, this is actually pretty clutch because it'll help protect your allies while also healing them or providing utility from close by. The abilities that it has are Star Surge. This is an incredible skill that is basically the rescue skill, so you summon an ally from up to 7 tiles away, dealing 22 damage to enemies adjacent to the ally's original tile. So if you've sent someone, maybe a tank, into the middle of all the enemies, and they're very weak and barely surviving, you can yank them out of there and do a huge AoE to all of the enemies that are surrounding them. These 7 tiles will also scale based on mastery, and you can upgrade them further. One of the upgrades is increasing the range that the ability can target, so making it 8. You can also reduce the mana cost by 15, which I would recommend. Mana cost and tiles reduced by 50%. Again, this is not good. And the caster is healed for a percentage of the damage done. I wouldn't use this because you're not always guaranteed to hit people, and sometimes you're just using this for utility. So increase range and decrease the mana cost is really the way to go with this one. Moonlight is the second skill. It's just a straight up heal, and you heal an ally within X number of tiles for X amount of HP. These both scale according to your mastery level. The first upgrade reduces the mana cost by 10. The second one also gives your target 10 extra mana, like we saw in one of the other skills. The third one increases range, which is great. It lets you heal more from a distance. And the fourth one lets you clear debuffs. All of these are great upgrades. If I were to choose, I would decrease the mana cost and either go with the range or clearing debuffs. Usually I always go with range. It creates more flexibility. The next class tree that we want to talk about is the one with these four, the Monk, Frigillan, Conduit, and Gale class tree. I don't really have a nickname for it. It's kind of weird. But let's talk about Monk first. So it is a one range physical focus class. In the HP, the growths it has are 20% HP, 15% might, 25% speed, 30% dex, 10% defense, 20% fortitude, 25% mastery, and 5% luck. This class has some pretty well-rounded growths, and its personal skill is Nerve Strikes. Attacks apply 5 heavy weak stacks. And what heavy weak does is it reduces the damage that the enemies deal. The abilities that it comes with are Charged Ki, which elevates the unit's key state, raising advanced stats by 8 for 2 turns. This is one of the greatest skills in the entire game, because if we go back here, these are your advanced stats down here. So power, accuracy, dodge, crit, and speed. If you're getting plus 8 to each of these, and that scales with your mastery, you're getting 8 speed, which is huge, 8 crit, which is a lot, 8 dodge is okay, and 8 accuracy is okay, and 8 power is a ton. It lets you use more utility-based weapons as well as skills and rings, and then you can just boost your own power with this class. The second skill, Ki Blast, is not as good. Oh wait, I didn't talk about the upgrades. You can reduce the mana cost of the ability by 10, which I would highly recommend, and then casting the ability heals the user for X amount of damage, scales per mastery, or clears debuffs, or you can reduce the mana cost in stats. This is garbage. You do not want to reduce the mana cost. You want the stats. You definitely want to reduce the cost of the mana of the ability by 10 without losing the stats, and then it's a toss-up between whether or not you want heals or debuff cleansing. Really up to you. Does not matter that much. The second skill, Ki Blast, is kind of a ranged pot shot sort of skill, kind of like a magical damage skill. You can increase the mana cost and the damage raised by 100%. You can increase the range, you can decrease the mana cost, or you can make it absorb some of the damage it's done to heal yourself. I'm never using this skill if I'm in the Monk class. It's always Charged Ki and attacking. Maybe there's some utility if you need to save yourself in a pinch with using this, but otherwise I wouldn't really use Ki Blast. Charged Ki is one of the best skills in the game. The next class we have to talk about is the Frigillan class. It is a one-range axe class that seems to be focused on tankiness. Its growths are 45% HP, 30% might, 10% speed, 10% dex, 30% defense, 10% fortitude, 5% mastery, and 15% luck. Its class skill is Defensive Fighter, which gives 5 power and 25% accuracy while block is active, so it really tries to help with the tankiness. Its abilities are Icy Spire, which creates an Icy Spire for 1 turn, blocking movement. This is really good, it's just a block. You drop that block on a space and no enemy or ally can pass through. They can't attack it, they can't go through it, they can't attack over it. It is just an absolute block and it helps you with choke pointing. It can come in really clutch. The upgrades can increase the duration by 1, reduce the cost by 10, increase the range by 1, or reduce the cost by 10 again. All of these are fantastic upgrades. If I was to choose, I would increase the duration and decrease the mana cost a little bit because the cost is already pretty low. But you can't go wrong with any of these. You can do double mana decrease, you can do increased duration or increased range. It doesn't really matter, it's all how you decide to play. The second skill is Defensive Stance, which applies 5 severe blocks to self. And so what severe is it's 3 attacks and the damage is reduced by 5. So again, trying to help you do that self-tanking and also activate the class skill, which boosts your damage and your accuracy. Like the previous one, we have 2 mana reductions, each by 10 to bring it down to 35%, increasing the number of stacks to 4, or clearing debuffs. I don't think clearing debuffs is a great idea, so I would probably take a combination of reducing the mana cost and increasing the number of stacks. The third class in this chain is the Conduit class, and the growths are 10% growth, 10% HP, 30% might, 10% speed, 15% dex, 5% defense, 25% fortitude, 35% mastery, and 25% luck. It is a 1-2 range magical-based class that seems to have really high mastery growth and focus on ranged attacks using your abilities. The class skill is Flux Overload. Mana usage within 2 tiles increases crit by 6 until the next crit. This is pretty inconsistent because you can't always be positioned properly to get that extra crit, and you're also usually using abilities with this class, so you're not always just taking regular attacks. Speaking of abilities, its abilities are Chain Lightning, which deals 21 damage and chains up to 3 enemies within 2 tiles, so they need to be within 2 tiles for the lightning to jump. But if they are, this can do a lot of damage and be very clutch. The upgrades are increasing the number of targets twice, so you can go up to 5 enemies that this Chain Lightning hits. You can increase the range that it targets by 1, or you can reduce the cost. I feel like increasing the number of targets is really what's important if you want to make good use of this ability. The second ability is Defibrillate, which heals an ally for 44 and applies light stun if they have more than 14 health. This is meant as a rescue heal. It's high cost, it is high heal, but you want to use it on a low health enemy, otherwise they're going to get stunned for a turn and not be able to move. The upgrades are reducing the mana cost by 10, this is good. Increasing healing mastery scaling by 30%. This will probably just let you heal up all the way to full, giving mana to the target that you're targeting, or increasing the range that the ability can target by 1. If it were up to me, I would reduce the cost and increase the range just to give me more flexibility and more uses of it in a pinch. The last class that we talk about in this tree is the Gale class, and the growths are 25% HP, 15% might, 30% speed, 25% dex, 5% defense and fortitude, 15% mastery, and 30% luck. This is your speed demon class that is meant to be high hit, high crit, and a dodge tank of sorts. It is a 1-range physical sword class, and unfortunately it feels like this class doesn't really know what it wants to do. The growths imply that you want to double and hit hard, but then you've got all these support skills, so it's really not meant to be a class that's like frontlining or doing damage or any of that sort. The class ability is class skill is Turbine, deals 6 extra damage to weakened enemies, and the abilities that come with it help you do exactly that. Ravager Winds applies 10 heavy weak stacks up to 5 enemies in a line. This is kind of weird because enemies don't always line up for you straight like you want them to, and so you're spending that mana to do it up to 5 in sort of an AoE sort of spread, but sometimes you're only hitting like 1 or 2. And you'll activate your ability against those 1 or 2, but what about the enemies coming from the side or coming from behind? This class doesn't really take care of that. The upgrades reduce the mana cost of the ability by 10. They can also apply Heavy Snare, stacks to targets equal to 1, which is really clutch because then you decrease their movement. You can increase the number of stacks applied by 4, which is kind of whatever, they'll just do less damage. And then you can also apply Light Poison, which decreases their stats. It's an okay skill, but it feels fairly inconsistent. Stormborn switches your damage type to magical. You can reduce the mana cost of it twice, you can have it clear debuffs, or you can heal yourself for 5 damage. Honestly, the magic damage could be nice because enemies are either magically based or physically based in this game. There's none that are really on both sides, so being able to switch can be nice sometimes. But honestly, these are 2 pretty situational abilities that aren't always going to be very consistent. This class is kind of disappointing. If you're going to choose from these 2 classes, I would go Conduit or Monk, and then go into your 3rd tiers from these 2. I wouldn't really make use of Gale or Frigillan, except in the growths department. And what you can do is you can level up in this class if you want the growths, and then switch over before you promote, and you'll lock in the abilities and the skill that way. The next class tree that we are going to talk about is the Summoner class tree, and it's not a magical summoner, it's more of like a Beastmaster summoner class tree because you use animals in these 4 classes. The first one we're going to talk about is the Quickdraw class, which is a 2-range physical bow unit, and the growths are 15% HP, 25% might, 35% speed, 30% dex, 10% defense, 0% fortitude, 10% mastery, and 10% luck. The class skill is Alacrity. Follow-up attacks regenerate 5 mana. Follow-up attacks are when you double, so you really have to double your enemy in order to get that mana regeneration. It's nice because you're using abilities a lot in this class to do damage or inflict debuffs. Speaking of abilities, the first one here is Wicked Cackle. You summon a hyena that laughs, unnerving enemies and applying 7 light weak stacks, which reduces their damage by whatever your mastery is, to up to 3 enemies within 2 tiles. So it's kind of like an AoE around you and it reduces damage. This is good if you're in a pinch and you need to take some hits. The upgrades are you can increase the number of targets that the ability affects twice, up to a total of 5. You can reduce the cost of the ability, which is always a good idea, or you can increase the number of weak stacks that it applies by 5. The second one is Command Hyena, which you attack with the pet, dealing 7 additional damage to whatever you were going to do at base, and applying 4 heavy bleed. The upgrades are reducing the mana cost by 10 twice, increasing the number of stacks by 5, or healing yourself for 50% of the damage that you do. I personally am a big fan of this for units, because then they can heal themselves and don't have to rely on healers, while also maintaining a decent damage output, and then maybe taking some of the reduced mana cost. The stacks aren't going to be that good in the long run. The second class that we are going to talk about is the Tamer class. This is a 1-2 range physical bow class that is actually quite tanky. I like this class a lot, actually. And the growths are 35% HP, 20% might, 5% speed, 15% dex, 20% defense and fortitude, 40% mastery, and 10% luck. This class has one of the highest mastery growths in the game, if not the highest one for a tier 2. And the reason why is because look at how high those ability costs are. You are meant to dish out huge amounts of damage with this class just with your abilities, and that's what the 40% mastery growth is for. The class skill plays along with that, and pet commands gain additional 25% mastery scaling to help them do damage even more. The abilities here are Call the Pride, applying X amount of light block stacks spread equally to all allies within 2 tiles, maximum of 12 each, so it helps your allies tank very nicely. And what you can do is you can reduce the mana cost of it twice, or increase the mastery scaling by 50% and then 25%. Honestly, I would take the 50% and then maybe one of the mana cost reducers if you really want to use the skill. It can be pretty good in a pinch. The second one is Command Lion, attack with your pet dealing 20 additional damage. This is just damage the skill. 20 additional. Now, the drawback is that this class is quite slow, so you're not going to be doubling a lot. But the 1-2 range and the fact that you can nuke with it probably makes up for it. You can also reduce the mana cost twice, which might be a good idea to let you use this every turn. You can increase the mastery scaling even more to help make for that one-shot nuke, or you can decide you want to heal yourself. Either or, this class is usually a good frontliner, and so you can do whatever you want with it. I actually really like this class a lot. It's one of the better designed ones in this game. The next class we are going to talk about is the Cutthroat class. This is a 1-range physical dagger class that has 20% HP, 10% might, 35% speed, 25% dex, 5% defense, 10% fortitude, 20% mastery, and 20% luck. This is your speed demon class that also has a little bit of luck tacked on, and it's meant to be a dodge tank class, and that's proven by the class skill that it has. Scrapper is your skill here, and every point of luck increases dodge by an extra 1. So it is a 1-to-1 ratio of increasing dodge with luck, and the extra luck growth on this class of 20% will help you boost that. It's not super high, but it is good enough, coupled with the base luck growths of most of the characters, to be able to get that dodge rate up. The abilities for this class are great. They utilize frogs, which is funny, and Licky Lasso has to be one of the most flexible skills in this game. You basically grab a unit within X number of tiles with your giant toad's tongue, and then you get to choose which adjacent tile you drop them on. You want to suck in a boss? You can do that. You want to, grab a random enemy that's troublesome and in a bad position for you? You can do that. You want to upgrade it and extend the range by 1 and 1 here? You can do that. You want to reduce the cost of it? You can do that too. Any of these upgrades would be good for this skill, and this skill is fantastic. The second skill is so overshadowed because you're going to be using Licky Lasso most of the time to get enemies positioned where you want them. This one is basic. You attack with your pet, you deal 7 damage, and you apply 4 heavy poison. The poison will help you if you want to attack or crit or dodge or whatever, and the little extra damage is nice, but this class's utility with Licky Lasso is so good that it'll overshadow this skill. For upgrades, you can reduce its mana cost by 10 twice, you can increase the number of poison stacks by 5, or you can let it heal you for a percentage of the damage done. If it were up to me, I would actually increase the stacks. Poison is a good status effect. Increasing the stacks would be nice. Reducing the stats of your enemy by 9 all around is actually pretty huge. And reduce the mana cost by 1 just to let you use it more. The last class in this tree is the Ranger class, and this is your tank 1-range physical axe class in this tree. And this one's kind of confusing because when you compare it to the Tamer class, they feel kind of similar. Actually, I like the Tamer a little bit more, even though the Ranger's a little bit more specialized. But for the 1-2 range, the abilities that it has, and the growths that it has, Tamer seems to have a little bit of an edge over Ranger. Ranger has 30% HP growth, 25% might, 15% speed, 15% dex, 30% defense, 10% fortitude, 5% mastery, and 15% luck. The class-specific skill is Shielding Stance. Falling below half health grants 8 heavy block, so it'll allow you to tank better. This is the advantage this class has over Tamer. It is more specialized to tank as opposed to Tamer that's more specialized for damage. The ability that it has are as follows. Lanky Spanky, which is a fantastic ability name, call upon your orangutan to mightily slap a foe applying 1 light stun. And if you don't know what light stun does, it literally does not allow the enemy to move. It's a pretty high mana cost though, so obviously the first 2 upgrades are reducing the mana cost by 10. The third upgrade lets you increase the range that it targets. It's already 1 to 2 and you can take it to 3. And the fourth one increases the stacks by 1. So if you want to stun an enemy for more than 1 turn, there you go. This can come in useful. I haven't used it myself, honestly, because I never used this class, but I do plan on using it for another playthrough, and I can definitely see where stunning an enemy for a couple turns might be very clutch. The second skill, Command Orangutan, deals 11 additional damage and applies 3 exhaustion stacks, which decrease the dodge and accuracy of an enemy. You can also reduce the mana cost of it twice, just like the one before. You can increase the number of stacks, or you can heal for the percentage of the damage done. Honestly, if I were to pick one between the 2, I would probably be using Lanky Spanky a lot more, or some of the 3rd tier skills over this one. But if you do need that extra damage, this can be nice and come in a pinch. The last class tree that we have to talk about is a personal favorite of mine, and that is the Blood Mage class tree that is very utility and specialized heavy. These are some of the best designed classes in the game, I think. And the first one I want to talk about is a personal favorite of mine, the Ritualist class. This is a 1-2 range magical dagger class, and the growths it has are 40% HP, 25% might, 15% speed and dex, 5% defense and fortitude, 20% mastery, and 30% luck. It is on the lower end of the speed growth, so you do want a unit that has a high base speed growth at base. It is very low on the defense and fortitude growths because this class is focused on lifesteal. And you can immediately see that reflected in its skill, Blood Mage. Attacks heal equal to enemy bleed stacks. So depending on the number of bleed stacks, you are going to heal that exact number of HP. And I'll explain it with the skills here. So Transfusion is your bread and butter for the skill and beyond whatever skill you decide to go to, and it applies 7 severe bleed stacks, chaining to 2 additional targets within 2 tiles. So not only are you bleeding 1 target, you're bleeding more than 1, you're bleeding up to 3. And this lets you become the ultimate enemy phase tank, because if you coordinate with the Blood Mage skill, say we're applying 7 severe bleed stacks, you get attacked, and you attack twice back, that is, you're healing up to 14 damage. And this will scale up with your mastery as well, so you will be doing more and more bleed and healing more and more the further into the game you go. If you're not doubling, this is not as good, and that's why I say the lower speed here really wants a character with high base speed. The upgrades are mana cost and stacks reduced by 50%, never take this. Increased stacks mastery scaling by 20%, which is really not that much. Reducing the mana cost by 10, this is a no-brainer, and increasing stacks by 3. More often than not, this will actually be better than increasing the mastery scaling by 20%. Hex is your second skill, and it reduces damage by 8 when you apply heavy weakness to an enemy. You're never going to use this skill. If you are playing this class, you are most likely always using Transfusion. And the upgrades here, just for completion, reduce by 10, increase range by 1, raise the cost and stacks by 100%, or increase the mastery scaling by 15%. I never use this on any unit that's a Blood Mage. If you have, please let me know, but I absolutely do not see a use for this. The next class is the Elementalist class. It is a 1-2 range magical relic class, and initially when I first saw this one, I didn't really think much of it. The growths that it has are 15% HP, 30% might, 10% speed, 25% dex, 10% defense, 20% fortitude, 30% mastery, and 5% luck. This class is pretty slow, but it has high mastery and high might, and it's meant to do damage with its abilities or help buff. Its personal skill, Invoke Spirits, is power increased by 4 after ability use until next combat, which is good. So, you can help buff units or do your AoEs, and you will increase your power until you decide to go into actual combat the next time. It's consistent. It never goes away. The abilities are Ice Shield. Shield an ally with ice, applying 7 heavy block stacks. This is good if you want to pair it with tank classes. The upgrades are allows the ability to be self-casted, reduces the mana cost by 10, or increases the range twice up to a total of 4. The second ability is Flame Strike, and this is an expensive 75 mana cost ability that calls a Pillar of Flame, dealing 23 damage in a 5-tile AoE. I really don't like the straight line tiles, honestly, if I'm being honest with you. And it takes a little bit away from the ability because, again, the enemies don't always stack up the way you want them to. But the amount of damage is indisputably high, as well as the cost. You can reduce the cost and the damage by 50%, but you most certainly don't want that. You can reduce the mana by 15, that's pretty good. You can increase the range that it targets by 1, that's also pretty good. Or you can increase the damage scaling by 40%, also great. I think you kind of need to reduce the mana cost by 15 if you want to upkeep this skill more and take it down to 60, and then it's a toss-up between increasing the range or increasing the damage based on how you utilize this class. The next class is the Waveseer class, and it is a 1/2 range magical focus class. And this is your bread and butter healing and support class. This is an excellent class, one of the best classes in the game, and it has 20% HP growth, 10% might, 30% speed, 15% dex, 10% defense, 25% fortitude, 25% mastery, and 10% luck. These growths are fantastic. The unit is fast enough and has the mage tankiness as well as the mastery to both take a hit and also scale up those abilities that you're going to be using to support. In addition to that, Aquatic Affinity is one of the best class skills in the game as it reduces mana costs by 30%. If you want to go to any of the other 3 tier 3 classes here and you want this skill, this is not a bad one to have. The abilities are Healing Wave, which heals 2 allies in a line for 17. This is a basic heal that heals more than 1 ally, which is good. You can choose to reduce the mana cost by 10 if you want, and you can see all of the mana costs here have immediately gone down because of the 30% that you're getting. You can also increase the number of targets by up to 4, and you can have it clear debuffs. For me, I would reduce the cost and increase the number of targets by 1. The second skill is Whirlpool, and this one you won't use too much, but I'm going to tell you right now, this can get extremely handy, especially in the higher difficulties, because it creates a 3x3 Whirlpool that units cannot move out of for 1 turn. It's high cost, but if you really need it in the clutch, this is amazing. You can reduce the mana cost twice, you can increase the range, and increase the duration. Honestly, if it were up to me, this isn't a skill that I'm spamming a lot, so what I would do is I would increase the range and increase the duration by 1 so that I can buy myself some extra time to act and do things without having to worry about enemies, and also pick them off slowly as I want them to. And now we get to the last class in this tree, the Juggernaut class. It is a 1-range physical axe class that is meant to tank, and its growths are as follows. 30% HP, 25% might, 5% speed, 15% dex, 25% defense, 20% fortitude, 10% mastery, and 20% luck. This is a really good solid tank class growths-wise. The abilities might be a little bit underwhelming, and so might the skill, but it does allow you for some decent upkeep. And again, the growths will let you tank very nicely. The class skill is Pain Absorption. Taking damage restores mana equal to damage taken. Pretty simple. So you're always going to have pretty high mana upkeep if you're consistently taking damage. The abilities are Absorb Pain, consume all active debuffs to heal for 8 each. So if you're getting debuffed because you're in the midst of a lot of enemies, you'll heal for a decent amount of damage. Personally, I really didn't get that much use out of this because debuffs, they happen, but they're not as frequent as you would like to keep healing, and it's always just easier to have a healer around you. You can increase the mana cost and healing by 50%. This isn't good here. You can increase the range that the ability can target. That's actually pretty good. Reduce the mana cost by 10. This is probably one of the better things you can do. And increase healing mastery scaling by 50%. This is also one of the better ones. So if you were to take 2, I would take these 2 here at the side. Wreathed in Flame is really the bread and butter of this class. You call flames, causing your next 2 attackers to take 8 damage after combat. This is basically your reflection, your shield, and when paired with the Aegis class, you can actually stack the amount of damage that's reflected back at the enemy to just kill them with reflected damage if you want. This can be a dangerous game though, because you don't want to keep getting consistently attacked in a slow class. The upgrades are increasing the duration of the ability by 2, so it'll be up to 4 attackers. You can reduce the mana cost, and you can increase the damage mastery scaling by 40%. If I were to choose, I would maybe increase the number of attackers once and maybe reduce the mana cost or the mastery scaling, because you are going to get attacked a lot in this class, and reflecting is pretty nice. So that is it for all of the tier 2 classes. That took a long time. This is going to be a fat video, but I'm committed. It's going to be a long video, and I'm going to upload it for you guys, and we are going to press on with the tier 3 classes. I'm doing this all in one take, by the way. I'm not stopping, so it is what it is. It's 11:30 at night. I'm going to go until midnight, I guess, or even longer doing the tier 3s because there's more details. And we will push on through. I'll edit it the next day. I'll have it up immediately. We're on the grind, guys. Subscribe if you've gotten this far. I appreciate you all. All right, so now it is time to jump into the tier 3 classes. The first class we are going to talk about is the Champion class. The Champion class is your bread and butter physical tank class. It is a one-ranged sword class, and it has a 45% HP growth, 35% might, 5% speed, 20% dex, 30% defense, 5% fortitude, 15% mastery, and 5% luck. Its personal skill is called True Speed, so you lose, or Titanic, sorry, you lose 4 True Speed and you gain 25% power. It is going to give you a lot of power. Look at that, 52, which is going to do a lot of damage, but at the same time, you're going to need to expect to be doubled and take damage as well. The abilities are Cut Them Down, so you attack dealing 67% of damage to enemies adjacent to the target, so it causes splash damage to any enemy that's next to each other. Again, positional abilities, not always very consistent, so you need to watch out. The upgrades are reducing the mana cost by 10 twice, increasing percentage done, so to 77%, and increasing percentage mastery scaling by 50%. Depending on your mastery, this might be better than this one, and then it's a toss-up between the 2 mana cost reductions. The next skill is Push Forward, attack dealing 67% of damage as healing to allies adjacent to the target. So if you've got a target and allies on either side of it, instead of doing splash damage, you're doing splash healing. And again, the upgrades are the same. You reduce the mana cost twice, increase the ability effect by 10%, or effect mastery scaling by 50%. Honestly, these 2 skills are kind of underwhelming. The class skill is good, but whatever class goes into this one, you might want to make sure that you have good tier 2 abilities or a good personal skill. For example, with Gwyn, Brutal Strike would be your bread and butter damage skill here, and that's what we will focus on, with these only being utility to be used when you think you can use them. The second class in this tree is the Ellisant class. It is a 2-range magical bow class, and it has 15% HP growth, 30% might, 10% speed, 30% dex, 20% defense, 10% fortitude, 35% mastery, and 10% luck. This is your long-range magical sniper class, and this is one of my favorites. I love it. The reason being is, its class skill is Blinding Light, attacks apply 25 heavy blind stacks. So the enemy's going to have a reduced hit rate, and because of its abilities, you'll be able to hit them from far away. Eternal Sun is the first ability. Allies within 3 tiles gain 39 accuracy for 2 turns. I honestly never use this. If you're in this class, you're using the next skill, but for completion, we'll go through it. Increases the AoE size by 1, increases accuracy mastery scaling by 50%, mana cost and tiles raised by 50%, and reducing the mana cost by 10. I would just ignore this skill, because the full draw skill is insane. Attack from up to 8 tiles away, and this number varies based on your mastery. Again, scaling 3 plus 20% mastery. The upgrades are as follows: mana cost and tiles reduced by 50%. Never take this. Increasing the range that the ability can target. Absolutely. This is the best upgrade you can do here. Caster is healed for a percentage of damage done. This one is iffy because you're going to be so far away, you're probably not taking damage. And increases tiles mastery scaling by 10%. I would take this one too. Like, I'll upgrade them here just to show you. But here, now it's 9. And then if I increase the scaling, now it's 11. I'm attacking from halfway across the map. Sure, it costs 50. But if you're next to a Loremaster, which we'll get into in a little bit, you will get a damage discount, or a mana discount on this, letting you potentially use it up to 3 or 4 times per map. And if you have a bow, because this class is going to be pretty slow, if you have a bow, there is a weapon skill that lets you attack twice at a 20% reduced amount of damage. So the eventually, or 40% reduced, I think it's like you attack twice at 60%. So you're going to be doing 120% as opposed to the 100%. So you're going to be doubling from far away and just dishing out a lot of damage, or even chipping away at enemies that you want to chip into. It can save you in a pinch. This skill is great. You're like a moving ballista. The next class we have to talk about is the Ancarant class. It is a 1-range physical dagger class, and it has a 0% HP growth. Yes, you heard me right. 10% might, 35% speed, 25% dex, 0% defense, 25% fortitude, 30% mastery, and 20% luck. If you're going into this class, you better hope you're not getting hit. And the class skill Midnight Ride helps with that. You gain 25 dodge when mana is below 35. I wish this was 50, honestly, because some of these skills are really good, but they're low cost. And so what you want to do most of the time is you're going to be using your speed up one, you're going to be using the poison inflictor, and you might not always consistently get below that 35 to gain the dodge. And if you're coming from Nightblade, where you have Shadow Step that has another dodge by 20 that lasts for 2 turns, stacking these will give you so much dodge that you probably won't be getting hit. In terms of abilities, we get 2 new ones. Moonlight Beacon, which applies 10 heavy vulnerable to up to 8 enemies in a 3x3 zone. This is great, especially if you need to knock your mana all the way down to get that extra dodge. The upgrades are reducing the cost by 15, probably a good idea. Increasing the number of targets by 1, In a 3x3 zone, there's not really going to be that many people anyways. It's either 8 or 9. Increasing the number of stacks, decent. Applying light poison, pretty good, honestly. I would take the light poison and the mana cost reduction if you really want to use this. The second skill is Glaive Toss, and you're basically just throwing stuff at enemies. This is your bread and butter attack skill. Deals X amount of damage that scales with mastery to an enemy within 5 tiles. Again, you can raise mana cost and damage by 50%. This actually might be a good idea if you want to activate your extra dodge, reducing the cost by 10 if you want to use this more than once as sort of a ranged chip ability, increasing the range extra by 1, and healing for yourself for 50%. This feels counterproductive because most of the time you don't want to get hit in this class. But I guess if you're caught out and you get hit by a low damage rate and you want to heal yourself, this could be good in a pinch. The last class in this class tree is the Reaper class, and this is probably my favorite class in this tree. I like the Ellisant a lot, but Reaper is up there. I think Reaper is the number one. And it has 25% HP growth, 25% might, 15% speed, 25% dex, 10% defense, 0% fortitude, 30% mastery, and 35% luck. This is your big damage one-shot crit class. And it's a 1-range physical axe class. Axes are the strongest weapons in the game. And the personal skill is nuts. Visage of Death. Crits deal 100% additional damage against full health enemies. So instead of doing double damage, you're doing triple damage. You will be one-shotting enemies with this class. You'll be one-shotting them so much that you might be in danger. This is a fantastic player phase class. And if I were to recommend how best to go into this, I would go Gallant, because you're getting damage plus 5 against enemies above 50% HP, into Reaper, where full HP enemies are getting more crit against. You're just, like, this is the best path, honestly. You should not go from Devoted. Go from Gallant. Even if you want to level in a different class, go to this first and then go into Reaper. You will stack both skills super synergistically. Let's talk about the abilities. Reaper's Mark. Probably the best ability for this class. Grants an ally 23 crit for 1 turns. You might be saying, why is this the best skill for the class? Well, because you can self-cast with an upgrade. So you do that. You increase your crit even more. You can also increase the duration of the crit if you don't want to cast this multiple times. You can reduce the mana cost, or you can increase the crit mastery scaling by 20%. These ones are hard to choose from because you really do want to self-cast, and you do want to increase the duration. I feel like 40 mana for 2 turns is better than 30 mana for 1 turn each. This one will give you 2 turns for 60 mana, and this will give you 2 turns for 40 mana. So always take this one over this one. This is actually a garbage upgrade. Allowing the ability to be self-casted is probably the best one, and then either this one or the mastery scaling, depending on how you play. The other skill is also excellent, and that's Blink. You just teleport 8 tiles away, and it also scales with mastery. You can increase the range of this by 1. Fantastic idea. You can increase the mastery scaling by 10%. You can clear debuffs. I wouldn't take this. And you can reduce the mana cost by 10. Honestly, wouldn't really take this either. I would take both of these, and I'll show you, up to 11 tiles. So just like the other one where we were walking a ballista, you can teleport halfway across the map. And the best thing is after you teleport, you can also attack. So if you have the Reaper's mark up, you teleport, you attack, the enemy's full HP, you can just come out of nowhere and nuke something. Immediately, just end its life, and it's over. This class is so fun, and one of the best classes in the game by far. If you have not used this, Gallant into Reaper Gwyn, monster unit. She's going to have already high might, and this power is inaccurate because I don't have a good weapon on her, but trust me, she will hit hard and do damage. All right, let's talk about the next class tree, and this is the one that branches off the Monk, Frigillan, Conduit, and Gale classes. And this one has one of my favorite classes in the entire game, and that's what we're going to start with, which is the Ascendant class, which has the one-range physical focus class. And the growths are as follows: 15% HP, 25% might, 30% speed, 30% dex, 10 defense and fortitude, 30% mastery, and 5% luck. The growths on this class are insane. They're just nuts. Like, if you want a offensive, high-powered class, it's this one. And the skill is even better. Elemental Fists, you gain 25 dodge, accuracy or crit, cycling with every attack. So it will change with each combat round, and you'll notice this. I wish it would just stick to crit. That would have been monstrous, but it would have been a little bit too broken. So I think the balance here is good. In terms of abilities, you have the most broken ability in the game, Divine Flow. But let's talk about key lands first. Attack with key energy in a 5-tile line, dealing 50 damage to any enemies. This is a lot of damage. Like, if you want to nuke in a straight line, it straight up just power creeps Key Blast. Key lands. Immensely better. You can reduce the cost by 10, good idea. You can increase cost and damage by 50%, terrible idea. Increase damage mastery scaling by 30%, not a bad idea. An ability will heal allies in the area effect. This is an interesting one, but you're never gonna use this skill, because what you're gonna use is Divine Flow. Become impossible to hit for 7 attacks. And this also scales by mastery. Now you can see here, I actually took reducing the mana cost twice. I'm gonna respec that because you can reduce the mana cost and you can scale it with mastery, and now it's 10 attacks. I covered this combo in my build video for Saxon and Cassandra. If you haven't seen it already, check it out on the channel. But what this entails is using a ring that gives you base 250 mana, using Charged Key to raise your advanced stats by an incredible amount, and then Divine Flow. You become an incredible, immortal unit that is killing everything in its path for 10 rounds of combat. It is disgusting. This is probably one of the best classes in the game, just by virtue of the fact that it makes you unkillable. Even if you don't end up finishing off the enemies, you will chunk their HP with some big damage and big crits, and you will survive and choke point and just be able to one-man show forever. It's great. I can't say good enough things about this class. It's almost impossible to follow that class up, but unfortunately, the one that comes next is the Godfrost class. I have a really sour taste in my mouth about this class because I tried to use it once and it just wasn't very good. It's a one-ranged physical axe class with 50% HP, 35% might, 10% speed, 15% dex, 35% defense, 5% fortitude, and 10% in mastery and luck. I know I'm going to slander this class, and a lot of people like it, so definitely do tell me in the comments below if you found a use for it, but I just think it's... Let's go through it. The personal skill Ice Incarnate, using mana applies 2 light snared to enemies within 2 tiles. Fine, this is okay. It's not amazing. It's not great. It's just a very average middling skill that you're not going to use much, which is kind of disappointing for a tier 3 class. The abilities are Absolute Zero, which is fantastic, but it is a very expensive skill. It costs 90 mana. You're going to drop the temperature, hardening your ice and gaining 15 defense and fortitude for 2 turns. 15 defense and fortitude is incredible. Incredible. And it scales with mastery too, which, here, I'll do an upgrade just to boost it. Now you've got 21. So this makes for an absolutely beastly tank class at the cost of low fortitude growth. So you're really only just going to be invincible to physical damage classes. It's also really expensive, so it's very hard to upkeep this. You can reduce the cost by 15 to get down to 75, but 75 is still a lot. Or you can increase the duration by 1, which is probably the wiser move. Again, let's do some math off the top of my head. 3 turns for 90 is 30 mana per turn, as opposed to reducing this to 75 and getting 2 turns, that's about 37.5 mana per turn. So this is definitely the better upgrade to get as opposed to the mana cost reduction. Unless all you're going to do is get both of these, I think you just get these 2. Honestly, it's better bang for your buck. You're going to use your entire mana bar, but it's going to last for 3 turns. You're going to be pretty much invincible. Not as good as the 10 rounds of combat invincibility monk. Well, maybe it is. I don't know. I'll have to experiment with this a little bit more and let me know in the comments. Following that up is Frostlock. You freeze an enemy's blood, applying 1 light stun. You just lock an enemy into place. This isn't good. Even if you reduce the mana to 30 and increase the range, this isn't good. You're going to be using absolute 0 every time if you're in the Godfrost class. It is what it is. Stormkeeper is the 3rd class in this group, and it is a 1/2 range magical relic class. It has 10% HP growth, 35% might, 10% speed, 15% dex, 5% defense, 25% fortitude, a whopping 40% mastery, and 25% luck. I really like this class because it is specialized and does what it needs to do. It hits hard and it nukes hard with abilities. Its skill obliteration, overkill damage, restores mana. Perfect. You're going to be using a lot of abilities with high mana costs. You need that restoration. This is fantastic. The extra 2 abilities that you get are Lightning Strike, calls lightning up to 7 tiles away, dealing 48 damage in a 5-tile cross. Incredible. You can strike from so far away and just do a massive AoE. You can increase the range and go up to 8. Kind of unnecessary, but nice. You can cause snare to targets equal to 3. Excellent. You slow them down from very far. You can reduce the mana cost. Another very good upgrade. Or you can heal allies in the area of effect. If it were up to me, I would reduce the mana cost to let me spam this, and then maybe pick the snare over the range, honestly. The second one is Storm Rider. Reduce movement costs greatly in a 7-tile line for 7 turns. You can increase the AoE twice here, but the fact that it's in a line isn't very good, but reducing movement costs is excellent. Reducing mana cost by 15 is also pretty good, then increasing the duration is also good. Movement is king in strategy RPGs, and if you can reduce movement costs, that's good. Now, I think this only applies, and correct me if I'm wrong, to terrain as opposed to your ally movement. So you're not buffing movement, you're just reducing costs. So it's not as consistent. Good class overall, though. If you're nuking with magic, I love it. Take this class. It's one of the better ones in this tree. Following that up is... I hate that this class is disappointing, man. The Tempest class. I really wanted this to be good. I love the sprite. I love the way it attacks. I had Mashal in it, who's a personal favorite of mine. But this is a 1-range physical sword class. It has 15% HP, 15% might, 35% speed, 25% dex, 5% defense and fortitude, 20% mastery, and 30% luck. This is, again, meant to be your upgrade to your crit dodge tank class that's really fast. And once again, all they give us is utility skills to a class that really struggles to frontline. Swift Strikes is nice. The personal skill, damage of follow-up attacks increased by excess true speed, but you have to be really fast. And a lot of the enemies in the late game are also really fast, so that you might not honestly see as big of a boost as you want from this, as you would expect. The abilities are Gathering Storm, gains 8 crit for every enemy within 2 tiles, lasts for 2 attacks. Again, this wants you to be right in the middle of the fray, but unfortunately you don't really have much dodge in this class. You can upgrade it to increase the duration to up to 4, decrease the mana cost, or increase crit by 1, so 9 crit. This isn't a great skill. It's pretty weak. Honestly, if I'm in this class, I'm using it now as a utility class, and I'm using Swift Winds. Because Swift Winds is actually incredible. Apply +2 movement to adjacent allies for 1 turn. Are you kidding me? Again, movement is king. You can increase it by 1 to apply 3 movement, and you can increase the duration to 2 turns. Opening with this is fantastic because you'll make your units move really far for 2 turns. And you can use this multiple times for battle. So this is a great class if you want to buff or debuff enemies for utility coming from Gale, but otherwise if you're hoping to do damage or like dodge tank or crit, I don't think this is very good, unfortunately. I really would like it to be, but this is more of a utility class than anything else. Okay, now for my favorite class tree, let's talk about the Hemomancer class tree. This should look familiar to you. This was my build for Cassandra. But unfortunately, the Hemomancer class isn't really that powerful. Ritualist as an upgrade is a bigger upgrade than Hemomancer is, but this one makes sense to go into, and it gives you a little bit of extra power. It is a 1/2 range magical dagger class, like the Ritualist one. It has 45% HP growth, 25% might, a little bit better 20% speed, 15% dex, a 0% in defense and fortitude, 30% mastery, and 35% luck. The personal skill is, or class skill is Dark Magic, power and crit increased by 1 for every 5 missing HP. This is good, because you can see here, my unit has a lot of HP. And so for every 5 missing HP, you get an extra power. Like, at some point, you're missing like 30 and 40 and 50 HP, and so you're getting like 6, 7, 8 power and crit. It's pretty significant, honestly. It's not an insignificant amount, and it's free. And it's consistent, which I like, so that's good. The abilities, though, I mean, like I said, the bread and butter, if you're coming from Ritualist, is going to be Transfusion. Now, you could be coming from a different class tree, so, you know, you won't always have this build. And so Soul Tear is the first skill that it gives us. Rip at an enemy's soul, dealing 16 damage for every severity stage of debuff they are inflicted with. So here, you've got Severe Bleed, so that's 3 stacks. So if you're using Soul Tear, that's 48 damage. Not that good, if I'm understanding it correctly. I haven't really tested this intensively, but that's what it seems like it does. You can increase the damage by 3 to go up to 19. You can decrease the cost by 10, which is decent, or you can increase the mastery scaling by 10%. Personally, I wouldn't really use this because the next one, Simulacrum, is really good. Create a simulacrum of an enemy at X% of their stats, and this scales based on mastery. You can see I've got the upgrades here. I'm increasing the range that you can target, and I'm increasing the mana cost. What it does is it creates a yellow NPC that's just going to fight with you alongside you, and it'll be an identical copy to the enemy you cast it on. You can increase efficiency mastery scaling by 50%. Let's see exactly how much that changes things. Yeah, so you get extra stats for that. Or you can get reduction of mana cost or increased range. I like the increased range so I can get it from a distance and yoink that enemy. This is a good skill. It's actually pretty fun. But most of the time, again, you're using Transfusion and you're bleed tanking, coming from Ritualist. That's how I played it. I didn't use these two skills very much. The next class in this tree is the Spirit Keeper class. It is a 1/2 range magical relic class. I didn't really use this one, but I do want to experiment with it a little bit more. But let's look at it. So it's got a 10% HP growth, 35% might, 10% speed, 25% dex, 10% defense, 20% fortitude, 40% mastery, and 5% luck. Again, this is a very heavily ability-focused class, and you can see that by its class skill, Soul Synergy. Combat increases effect of next ability by 25%. So we had the Elementalist that after use an ability increased damage. This one's the other way around. Combat increases effective ability by 25%. So let's take a look at the abilities. Resurrection, a whopping 90 cost to just resurrect a dead player unit with up to 35 HP and 62 mana. Now, on demonic mode, this is useless because a death is a game over. So this is a dead skill on the hardest difficulty. Now, I understand this game was designed without demonic in mind, but just keep that in mind. Resurrection's a dead skill on demonic mode. You'll never be able to use this. On other modes, great. It can be a panic button. You can increase the HP that they come back with by 5 twice, or you can reduce the mana cost twice. I would take the mana cost, honestly. You can heal HP. Mana recovery is slower. The other skill is Damage, or Spirit Bomb. Unleash the power of spirits, dealing 41 damage in a 3x3 zone, and you can attack it from a distance. This is great. I would increase the range on this, and I would reduce the mana cost by 25. That brings it all the way down to 55. That makes it actually usable more than once. This is a good skill. I have nothing to say about it, and it'll scale with mastery, again. The next class is the Tidecaller class, and this is the most broken support class in the game. It's a 1/2 range magical focus class. And you will never use that 1/2 range because the Tidecaller is just going to spam abilities. And the growths are 20% HP, 15% might, 30% speed, 15% dex, 10% defense, 20% fortitude, 35% mastery, and 10% luck. Now, I want to show you this on another unit, Howran. because I actually went down Waveseer into Tidecaller for him. And Rising Tides, ability use increases mastery by 4 till end of mission. This is great because, again, it increases the potency of your abilities. And let's take a look at the abilities, right? So if you're coming from Tidecaller, you're getting that 30% mana reduction already. This is huge. You want this because look at the expensiveness of these skills. Chain Heal, again, let's go back to what it looked like on Cassandra, 60 and 80. Immediately, once you go back to Howran, 42 and 56. You've got a 24-point discount here and an 18-point discount just for coming from Tidecaller, and this is a pure utility class. You should not come to this class from anything else. The first skill is Chain Heal. Heals up to 3 allies for 28, changing up to 3 tiles away. Big heals, honestly, it's good, but you're probably not going to use it much. Healing Wave is almost equally as good, unless you have a lot of allies close by that need healing. You can increase the number of targets, you can increase the cost and targets by 50%, or you can reduce the cost even further by 15. Now, when you reduce the cost, you can see it only went down by 11 because this 15 stacks prior to the 30% and then it gets reduced. But Chain Heal for 30 is pretty decent. The main bread and butter of this skill is going to be Restoring Waters. Refresh an ally's turn. It's a dance. You let them go again. And what did I do? I stacked range on it. As simple as that. Now, you can see that it goes down to 1 range. That's initially what it starts on. But I would absolutely recommend the range upgrades because there is a ring that then doubles the upgrades to the ranged upgrades that you get here. So you can see that when I upgraded once, it went 1 to 3. And then when I upgraded a second time, it went 1 to 5. So it doubles. So now you can dance at a distance. And the mana reduction here, like you can go down by 30 mana and it'll be nice. But I would recommend just pairing your Dancer or your Waveseer with a Loremaster and get that 15% reduction. And we'll talk about the Loremaster in a little bit because it's a really good class to pair that with. But this is one of the best skills in the game. It lets your broken units become even more broken, attack even more. It's great. This class is one of the best classes in the game. And after that, we have the Dreadnought class. Now, this one's interesting because it's an upgrade from the Juggernaut class, and I don't know quite how I feel about it. I need to do a little bit more research and testing with it. I think it can be good with the right unit and the right bases and the right growths, but it's a 1-range physical attack class, and it uses axes just like it came from previously. The growths are 30% HP, 25% might, 5% speed, 15% dex, 30% defense, 25% fortitude, 10% mastery, and 20% luck. So it gets a little bit more extra defense and fortitude from the previous class, which is nice. The skill is Relentless, never misses but cannot dodge, which is fine. Most of these units are going to be low speed anyways and not really highly dodgy units. And being able to hit back with these heavy weapons is honestly really, really good because you don't have to worry about accuracy. You can take some of the weapon skills that reduce your accuracy and increase your power to let this really have some pretty big single hits for a tank. The abilities are Dread Blessing. Grant an ally your blessing, applying 33 light block stacks. This skill is absolute ass unless you take the ability to be self-casted because you want this on yourself and you want to block the attacks yourself because you're going to be tanking. The target can restore mana by 10. This can be decent. Clear debuffs or increase the range. I wouldn't take either of these two. I would give me a mana refund and cast it on myself, which effectively makes it a 35 cost skill. Bloodstroke, attack an enemy with 12 additional damage increased by 1 for every 5 missing HP. This can be interesting, but if you are building a tank, the goal is to not take damage. Increases HP threshold by -1. So that can be pretty decent. For every 3 HP, you increase your damage by 1. That's fairly significant. And then I want to see how much the mastery scaling increases. Okay, the mastery only affects damage. So this can be okay, but I wouldn't use it too regularly. I would probably take the light blocks as well as come from Dreadnought and use the one that reflects damage back. But I think this can be a decent skill, and I'm working on it in one of my playthroughs now. All right, time to do the tier 3s in the mage classes. So I know I've hyped up Loremaster a lot. I really actually do like this class, more so for the utility that it provides than anything else. It is a 1/2 range magical relic class. The growths are 25% HP, 25% might, 30% speed, 10% dex, 5% defense and fortitude, 25% mastery, and 10% luck. Going up to this from Scholar gives you absolutely 0 bonus growths. It's kind of crazy. You get some base stats, but you get no enhancement in your growths. And I don't really understand why. The class skill is Making History. Allies within 2 tiles expend 15% less mana, and this stacks with the Waveseer 30% discount. That's why I was commenting, pair your Waveseer with the Loremaster. That's like a 45% reduction in whatever the base was. It's great. And another thing I did next to my Loremasters, you know who I put? I put these babies, the Ellisants, because then you're getting your mana full draw discounted too, and you can spam that even more from even further away. Great combo. Have a Loremaster, a Dancer, and an Ellisant, and what you're doing is you're firing from further away for cheaper, dancing that same person for cheaper, firing from further away again for cheaper, and then your Loremaster's just kind of hanging out, and if you're coming from Scholar, they can phase and do utility. The abilities are as follows. You have The Breaker, which is an 85 mana cost. Deal 32 damage to all units, including allies within two tiles. They just explode. You can reduce the cost and damage by 50%. This is terrible. You can reduce the mana cost by 20. Decent. You can increase the size of the AoE by 1. Also decent. And you can apply Heavy Snare. Okay. I never use this skill. I don't really see a utility for it. If you're in Loremaster, you're probably coming from like Phase, Ancient Writ, some kind of utility tier 2, and you're using those instead. Rousing History applies 18 light vulnerable to up to 5 enemies within 2 tiles. You can increase it to go up to 7 enemies, or increase the number, up to 6, and increase stacks by 1. You can also apply Light Poison. This would probably be a decent upgrade. Or you can increase the stacks mastery scaling by 20%. Again, not a great skill, honestly, but it's usable. The main utility of this class, again, like I said, is in its skill with that 15% mana save. It can help fund other units and increase their efficiency. The next class on the list here is the Relic Knight class, which is the 1-range physical sword upgrade from Aegis. And I actually kind of like this class, and I want to try it out. The growths are 35% HP, 20% might, 10% speed and dex, 30% defense and fortitude, which is 5% less than Aegis for some reason, and 10% mastery and luck. The class skill is Unstoppable. Killing an enemy grants 6 defense and fortitude until next turn. This is really, really good. It helps them tank even better. The abilities are Blade Storm, attack 3 times at 43% reduced power, which means basically you're doing 129% of what you would normally do for 50 mana cost. You can increase the cost in the attacks by 100%, so now it costs 100 and it does 6 times as many damage. So what you're doing is 256% instead. I don't know if I would take this. Increase percentage mastery scaling by negative 20%, so now you do 38% reduced power. Why would they do that? I don't understand it. Negative 20? That seems weird. You're just losing damage for no reason. Reduce the mana cost and heal for 50% of damage done. This is okay, but I feel like Swirling Blades would be the better skill here, because you animate 4 blades for 4 turns, dealing 30 damage to adjacent enemies on turn start. If you pair this with the Aegis Reflector damage, and you tank on enemy phase, you're basically not going to have any enemies around you on player phase, which is a good thing, because rather than eliminating them on enemy phase and having them keep coming and attacking you, you can eliminate them on player phase and have a safer player phase. You can increase the number of turns, excellent. You can increase the mana cost and damage. This is one of the few scenarios where I would actually take this, because you're doing it for 4 turns. Reducing the mana cost by 15, you can offset this here, or you can increase damage mastery scaling by 50%. Again, pretty self-explainable. This is a good skill. I like this. This class is kind of funky. I need to practice with it a little bit more, but it honestly seems like a pretty good class, especially if you can get their defenses up there enough to tank. The next class in this tree is the Necromancer class, and it is a 1/2 range focus magical class, and its growths are 20% HP, 30% might, 10% speed, 25% dex, 10% defense, 30% fortitude, 10% mastery, and 5% luck. The only upgrade it gets from Warlock is an extra 5% to might, which is really not that much. The class skill is Soul Steal. Enemies dying within 2 tiles grant 20 mana, which is an interesting choice, because coming from Warlock, you're kind of healing yourself. I would have expected the deaths to heal you here instead of grant you mana, but sometimes it can be similarly, because if you look at the first ability, Drain Life. Let's talk about the abilities. Animate. Reanimate fallen foes, creating a zombie at 84% efficiency. It's kind of similar to the Hemomancer skill that lets you create an an NPC. Mana cost and efficiency reduced by 50%. Never take this. Reducing the mana cost by 15 twice. This could be very worth it. Or increasing the efficiency master scaling by 30%. It's only a little bit worth it. So I would honestly just take the cost reductions here and bring it down to 50. Drain life is your damage skill and also healing. You basically lifesteal. You deal 34 damage and heal for the same amount. You can reduce the mana by 5 each. You won't really get as much of a boost from this. Or you can increase the cost, damage, and healing raised by 100%, so you double it, 90 cost, 68 damage. Or you can increase damage and healing mastery scaling, which is I think what I would take here. It only increased it by 3, but it's the most consistent increase that you're going to get for this skill. This class is okay. I don't think it's great. I think the other 3 classes are all better than it, but if you disagree with me, again, let me know, and if you just want to create zombies, then fair play to you. The last class in this tree is the Cosmician, and I love this class. It looks sick. It is just about mastery and damage, and the growths also complement that. So you get 30% HP growth, 20% might, 5% speed, 10% dex, 25% defense, 10% fortitude, a whopping 40% mastery, and 20% luck. In addition to that, Imperial Magic, mastery plus 15 when HP is full. This is huge. Huge. It will make your abilities cracked. Cracked! Just monstrously insane. And I'm going to go to Arthur to show this off because he's in it. Look at that mastery. 62. 62. And an 80% mastery growth. He is nuts at the end of the game. Let's look at the abilities to show you why. Astral Reckoning. 80 cost, but does 73 damage in a 3x3 square. That will kill a lot of enemies just straight up. You can raise the mana cost or reduce mana cost and damage by 50%. Do not do this. Heal allies in the area of effect. This can come in handy. Heavy Snare, decent. Mastery Scaling. Take this. This is damage. You want more damage on this. The second skill is what makes this class so fun, though. This is potentially the highest single target damage skill in the game. Meteor. And if you know me, you know I love meteors. It is a 45 mana cost skill and does 125 damage to an enemy. You are going to one-shot every single enemy in the game with this skill. And it doesn't even cost much. You can just nuke and the enemy dies. The upgrades, the reason it's 3 range is because I took the one that increases the range. No brainer. And I took the one that gives me more damage. No brainer. It's already cheap enough. I don't need to decrease the cost by 10. And I'm not going to need lifesteal if the enemies die. I love this class. It is the definition of nuke mage. If something needs to be killed and die, this class will kill it. 100%. 125 damage. You are going to one-shot some bosses with this. Not even kidding. It's crazy. I don't want this to be nerfed, but this is a lot of damage. All right, so the last class tree we have to talk about is the Summoning class tree, or the Beastmaster class tree, and we are going to start out with the Deadeye. The Deadeye is your 2-range physical bow unit that upgrades from Quickdraw, and it has a 15% HP growth, 30% might, 35% speed, 25% dex, 10% defense, 5% fortitude, 25% mastery, and 10% luck. It got a little bit of a stat upgrade, but for some reason the dex growth went down, which is weird for a sniper. The class skill is Lethality. Half of overkill damage is stored for units' next attack. This is very nice, because this class is going to double, and most of the time when you double, you kill. And just getting some free damage is very nice. The abilities are Wing Buffet, assault an enemy with wind, causing them to be double attacked in their next combat. It basically guarantees you doubles. If you have a really heavy hitting, one-shotting class, I know we talked about one of those, Wind Buffet is very good. It will let your ally double. It's a support skill. And you can reduce the cost down to 30, or you can increase the range up to 4. It's a good utility skill. And then we have the damage skill, Command Hawk. This skill is disgusting. Attack with your pet, dealing 46 additional damage. The only reason it has contention is because this monkey that Zanil has is very strong, but 46 additional damage. That's a lot. That's a lot of additional damage, and it's 2 range. You can increase the damage more. You can increase the Sphere Blind stacks more, but honestly, I would just take Mastery Scaling, 54 damage, and reduce the cost so I can spam it. 45 cost. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. I would take it. This is a decent class all around. If you need range damage, this is a good one. The next class here is the Beastmaster class, and it is a 1/2 range physical bow that upgrades from Tamer. It has a 40% HP growth, 20% might, 5% speed, 15% dex, 25% defense and fortitude, and 45% mastery, as well as 5% luck. This class has the highest mastery growth in the game, and that's because it's just meant to spam abilities. And you can see the class skill, Command Pet, costs half mana. You've got a ton of mastery, you've got a lot of high damage abilities, you've got half mana, and if you come from Tamer, you've got another 25% additional damage. And the abilities show. Look at these costs. Beautiful. Hellhound Breath. Apply 3 severe snare stacks in a cone to up to 6 enemies in the area. So you just slow them down. And you can increase the number of targets up to 8. You can give them light poison attacks equal to 4, or you can reduce the cost. This skill is not fantastic, but the next one, Command Cerberus. Now that's a skill. Attack with your pet, dealing 49 additional damage and applying 16 heavy block to the caster. This class is a tanky class, if you remember from when we talked about Tamer. Adding 16 heavy block to that would be really, really nice utility-wise. You can also reduce the mana to bring this down very low. Honestly, with the reductions that you get, each one is 4. These aren't really worth it. The number of stacks and the healing is probably worth more, unless you want a 24 cost skill. Up to you. This class is really good. It's tanky, and it deals a ton of single target one-shot damage. The next class is a personal favorite of mine, and that is the Slayer class. It is a 1/2 range physical damage class. The growths are 25% HP, 20% might, 30% speed and dex, 5% defense, 10% fortitude, only 5% mastery, which feels odd, and 20% luck. I feel like that 5% mastery has to be a mistake. The class skill is Ricochet. Each attack has a 20% chance to hit again. This is really good, because if it activates, you're just getting free extra attacks, and that can stack up to a lot of damage. The abilities are Stinger Strike, applies heavy stun to a foe. You just lock them in place for a couple turns, and you can reduce the mana cost by 5s or increase the range by 1. Can't go wrong with any of these, honestly. It's a just pretty solid skill all around, but you're not going to use it much. And then Command Wyvern, attack with your pet, dealing 29 additional damage and applying 8 severe poison. I'm a little bit conflicted on this one because the poison applies after you hit them, and sometimes you just kill them so the poison goes to waste. You can reduce the cost down to 20, which makes it worth using. You can increase the poison stacks by 5, again, inconsistent, or you can lifesteal. Also pretty good, but more often than not, you're probably going to be using the other skills instead. This class is really carried by Ricochet. Ricochet is really, really strong. I like this class. The growths are also pretty good, except for the mastery. That one's kind of confusing. All right, now for the very last class that we have to talk about. This is the Warden class. This is your 1-range physical axe class that upgrades from Ranger. It has a 25% HP growth, 35% might, 20% speed, 15% dex, 20% defense, 10% fortitude, 5% mastery, and 15% luck. Why in the world it has less HP and 10% less defense than the Ranger class to get 5% more speed and 10% more might? This is a tank class. Why are you taking away my tankiness? Give me back my 30% defense, upgraded to 35, and give me more fortitude. I went in this class to tank. Do not take that away from me. That's my criticism for this class. Its skill, Protector, adjacent allies gain 6 defense. It feels like this class is moving away from a tank and more of a utility, honestly, because Ranger was pretty decent at tanking. You get 8 heavy block. Stack something onto that. Give me more. Give me defense and fortitude here or something. It just frustrated me to see that. These skills are Sick'em. Send out your Grizzly Bear with 19 additional HP to attack your foes. You basically summon a bear. This is really fun, but it will cost all of your mana. Every last drop. Unless you get the mana reduction, which can be worth it. Or you can increase the HP by 20. I haven't played around with the Grizzly Bear too much, so I don't know how much HP it actually has in total. But yeah, you guys let me know. And then Command Grizzly is the skill, attack with your pet, dealing 28 additional damage and applying 1 heavy stun. This is pretty good too, because you just lock the enemy into place while doing additional damage, so if you're not going to kill, you can stun him and hold him there for the next turn. But yeah, this is a nice class. The skill and the growths are a little bit frustrating, and the bear is nice. I'll admit that. The bear is nice. But yeah, so that is every single class in the game in detail. This video has to be like what? Oh, it's an hour and 40 minutes long. So anyone who's watched this all, thank you. If you learned something, leave a like, subscribe, and yeah, I'm happy to provide that content for you. I can't believe I just sat here for an hour and 40 minutes and recorded this video. I don't have much more to say. I'm going to need to go drink a lot of water now. So with that being said, I will see you guys in another video very soon. Peace.